Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso, and this evening we have our weekly mug chat, opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism and possibly receive some answers. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start going through the questions. So if you have questions, please type them into the comments window and I'll do my best to answer them. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Rick, Jerry, Mary, Alyssa, Bhumika, Jayanta, and everyone else who's watching. And I see a couple questions so far. So we have one here from Rick. Rick is asking, did the Buddha give any guidance on developing the skill of listening? So depends what you mean by the skill of listening. So did he give guidance on developing the skill of listening? Well, what's actually coming to mind is there's a discourse on receiving criticism in which the Buddha says if somebody criticizes you, then you should reflect on yourself. You should reflect, is there truth in what they're saying? And if the person is actually saying something truthful and it's connected to Dhamma, then you should make an effort to take their advice to heart. So that implies listening, because if you're not listening to people, then of course you can't evaluate the truthfulness or accuracy of their words. But in terms of a sutta specifically about guidance on listening, I mean, what guidance do you need? Listen, pay attention to what the other person is saying. Like, it doesn't actually seem like a particularly complicated concept. So develop the skill of listening. I mean, what's there to develop? Listen, pay attention, try to figure out what the other person means by what they're saying. Another place I can think of is the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, which is translated usually as the analysis of non-conflict. And in there, the Buddha similarly gives advice of when somebody is speaking, not to get caught up on the specific terminology that they use, but rather try to understand what they mean by those words. He gives the example of how one person might say bowl, and another says vessel, and another says plate, and another says dish. And he said, instead of insisting on it being one particular word, instead you should try to understand what is it they mean when they're saying this. So that might be another example of guidance on the skill of listening. But actually, I mean, I think the whole idea these days about people needing to develop the skill of listening says more about the problems people have with listening, rather than about there being any particular need to have extensive advice on the topic. And Jerry asks, regarding this morning's sutta, does it describe a needed progression? What are the requisites for exclusively thinking of mental supports and ornaments from generosity? So I do think that the sutta this morning is given in a specific order, but it's not necessarily a progression so much as giving a list of attitudes behind generosity, ranging from the most mundane and self-centered, leading up to the most spiritually beneficial. But it's not necessarily a progression, like you need to do number one, but before you do number two, and then number three, and so on. But it is a sequence in that it's giving it in terms of how, in accordance with Dhammas, like how spiritually beneficial is each kind of giving. So giving is always good, but that sutta does give a clear sense that there are ways of giving which are better than others. So that's the progression there. It's not necessarily like first you need to give gifts thinking, I will have this in my next life, and then you can progress to the second kind of giving and so on. And so far, that's it for questions. So hopefully there'll be some more questions. Otherwise, we'll have a very short session. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that occurred to me regarding listening is the questioning method you see in the suttas where um, though there will be, um, say, there are these three qualities that are a wise, um, or typify a wise person or something. And then asking um, like a question of the audience um, of, would that be skillful or unskillful? So kind of like
I don't see what that has anything to do with the person's question.
well, I was just thinking like kind of gauging as the discourse is going along whether the listeners are kind of following. Does that
And I get what you're saying. It's not what the person is asking.
Right.
So it was one of the methods that the Buddha would teach was the method of asking questions of the audience and then using their answers to then direct how he taught from there. But I don't think that's what the person is asking about. Yeah. Okay, we have another question here from Moraya. Moraya asks, what are some skillful ways to get the mind willing to meditate? Once in a while when I sit to meditate, it seems like my mind is refusing and won't stay with the object and is highly distracted. Do you recommend just stopping and trying again later, or is this going to build a bad habit? Well, I don't recommend stopping. So once you've decided to do a period of meditation and you've set the length of time, stick with it until the end of the period. I don't recommend stopping partway through. What I do recommend, though, is consider changing your meditation method. So it's very important to be using a method that you're interested in. And often when the mind is rebelling against meditation, it's because you don't really want to do that specific method, at least not right now. So it's good to have several different meditation methods that you can switch between as needed. So maybe you normally do mindfulness of breathing, but right now you sit down and you're just like, I really don't want to. Well, that's fine, because you can also do loving kindness meditation. You could also do 6 elements. You could also do perception of impermanence. You could also do silent illumination. You have a number of different options you could choose between. And maybe you also want to try out something new. So it's also good to have 1 or 2 meditation methods in mind which you don't have much experience with, but which you want to experiment with. So every now and then you'll get in those modes where you want to try something new and experiment with a new way of practicing meditation. So then you can bring out something that you've been thinking about trying but haven't gotten around to, or something that you've only done a little bit of and you want to experience more. So that's something I highly recommend, is have several different options for meditation. And pick one that is interesting to you at the time, something that is requires less force to make the mind stay with it. And sometimes actually the best thing to do when you just really can't make yourself be interested in your meditation method is just stop trying. Like, continue in the meditation posture. So like if you're sitting, then stay sitting. But just stop trying to meditate. Stop trying to do anything at all, in fact. Just let the mind go blank. Like, stay awake. Don't doze off or daydream or something, but just stop doing anything at all. Stop trying to meditate. Stop trying to think. Stop trying to remember. Stop trying to space out. Stop trying to anything at all. Just totally give up all effort. Just take a few deep breaths and just appreciate not doing anything at all. enjoy not doing anything at all. Delight in not doing anything at all. And you might find that then the mind starts to relax and naturally settle into a state of concentration. So sometimes that's really effective. Another thing which can help is to do standing or walking meditation. If you normally do sitting, well, sometimes you'll just find that your mind is more inclined towards walking meditation or standing meditation. So also give yourself the option to do that. Some people get much better results with walking meditation than they do with sitting. And I've met some people who do most of their practice in the standing posture. So also try that out. That can make a difference. And we have a message from Ajahn Nisabo. Hello, Ajahn. Good to see you on. Hope all is well for you. Okay. And we have some more questions here. So Rick says, I have heard Dhamma teachers say it is skillful to bring mindfulness to listening, hearing what they say while being in tune with how what they say resonates in our body. Yeah, I mean, that sounds fine. And generally speaking, as I mentioned earlier, when people are talking to you, you should be listening to them, paying attention to what they're saying. That kind of goes, in my mind, that kind of goes without saying. And also, mindfulness of the body is always appropriate. You should always be doing mindfulness of the body all the time, regardless. So yeah, when someone's talking, you should be paying attention to what they're saying and doing mindfulness of the body. So I certainly agree with that. And Dempson asks, is there a concept of prayer to achieve a particular outcome in Buddhism? For example, asking for forgiveness or repentance. There's a concept of setting an intention. So forgiveness, well, forgiveness from who? If it's forgiveness from another person, you should just ask them for forgiveness. If it's forgiveness from yourself, then have the intention to forgive yourself. So forming that intention. Repentance, again, is an internal intention. So when you recognize you've done harmful things and you want to stop doing them, then you make a resolution to not do harmful things anymore. So that's also an internal intention. So neither one of those have anything to do with prayer. When I think of prayer, I normally think of, I forget the technical term for it, but the kind of prayer where you're requesting specific favors from a deity. And that doesn't really have any place in Buddhism. I mean, you can request favors from devas if you want to. It just doesn't have much relevance to Buddhist practice because awakening cannot be granted to you by an external source. It can't be granted to you by a deva. So it's something that we have to develop within ourselves. So, I mean, prayer in the sense of requesting favors from external beings, it's not anti-Buddhist, it just doesn't have anything to do with Buddhism. So you can still do such things if you want, they just don't have anything to do with Buddhism. So Jerry clarifies. He says, how should I train to be able to exclusively focus on mental supports and ornaments while giving? I can't seem to keep my mind focused there. Well, one thing you can do is before performing an act of giving, remind yourself that you're practicing generosity because it is part of the path to awakening. And you're doing so in order to practice selflessness and renunciation. And then while giving, stay focused on that attitude. This is part of the path of awakening. I'm doing this to practice selflessness and renunciation. And then afterwards, reminding yourself, that was part of my practice of the path to awakening, the cultivation of selflessness and renunciation. So before, during, and after, reminding yourself of its place as part of Buddhist practice, specifically part of the path to full awakening. That might help. Okay, so we have a question here from Madame Zeroni, who says, I've written in many times regarding my job, testing my morality. It's always testing my speech and asking me to lie, albeit in small ways. Most recently, you may remember going very long periods without breaking my 5 precepts for about a couple years. And now it happens almost every other month. I must lie about some small detail in writing here and there. How can I make sure I don't break my precepts again? I want to be strong, but I don't know how. Is the best thing to just leave my job and go somewhere else? I have been very stressed about this and want to be a good Buddhist consistently again. You might need to have a conversation with your boss, your manager, whoever it is, and just directly tell them that you have this religious vow of not telling even small lies. And if you want to continue working there, well, first you need to ask yourself, do I actually want to continue working here? Do I want to continue with this job? And if the answer that you tell yourself is yes, then you might need to have a talk with your boss and explain to them that you do want to keep working there. However, you have this religious vow of not telling even the smallest lies. So that means that in the course of your job, you can't do anything which is telling a deliberate lie. And ask your manager how to go about keeping your job without telling even small lies. And you might even just directly tell your manager, like, you don't want to quit your job, but if you have to choose between telling lies and quitting your job, then you'll choose quitting your job. And there's a chance that your manager might see your point of view and see what they can do to help you resolve that problem and find a way to not tell lies while keeping your job. Or they might decide that they want to get somebody else who's more comfortable with lying, and they might be perfectly fine with you quitting. In which case, that's a very good indication that quitting is the right choice for you. And Jefferson asks, what is the chitta? So chitta is a Pali word that means mind. It's usually set as opposed to the body. So we talk about body and we talk about mind. So mind is that aspect of experience which is aware, which knows, which thinks, which considers, which is aware. And in the suttas, the word chitta is almost synonymous with the word mano or manas. And it's also almost synonymous with the word nama. So all of these are different words that are used to mean mind, the mental component of our experience. It's usually subdivided into smaller categories, which, depending upon where you look in the suttas, there's different subcategories given, but it's just different schemes, different formats for understanding the different aspects of mind. So all of these aspects are impermanent and impersonal. So every aspect of mind is impermanent, subject to arising and ceasing, and all of it is impersonal. It's not self. It's not a lasting, ongoing soul or entity or personal being of any sort. What gets a bit confusing is that you'll sometimes hear Buddhist teachers use the word chitta to talk about some kind of eternally existent being separate from the 5 khandhas. But that usage of the word chitta has no basis in the suttas, and in fact seems to be quite staunchly opposite to what the Buddha was teaching. So that can be a bit confusing in that some Buddhist teachers will use the word chitta in a way which is very different from how the Buddha used it. But as the Buddha used it, it's just talking about the mental component of our experience, which is just as impermanent and impersonal as everything else. And Rick says, can you share some reflections on Dhamma teachers who freely offer their spiritual path versus people in the world who try to force their spiritual or religious views on others and society? Not really, no. People do whatever they do. The world is full of people who do things that I don't approve of. It's full of people doing things which I don't approve of. And that's okay. That's the nature of reality. Yeah, it's important not to be too judgmental of other people. It's good to remember that virtually every single person in the world is unawakened. Most of them are extremely delusional, in fact. And most of them are in some extreme state of mental discomfort, and they don't know why. So it's important to have compassion for people who do inappropriate things or unwholesome things, because they're doing so from a place of confusion. So if you see someone who seems to be doing something harmful, have compassion for them, because it's just a symptom of their confusion. So yeah, there are lots of people in the world who try to force their views on other people. That's reality for you. Reality is messy and uncomfortable, and it has lots of not very nice people doing not very nice things. So our choice is to try not to suffer about it. And HPD says, I would like to know, why do Nor speak about Tibetan Buddhism? There's something missing from your question here. Maybe you're asking why I don't speak about Tibetan Buddhism. And the simple answer is because I don't practice Tibetan Buddhism. So I don't have much to say about it because I don't have much experience with it. So I usually don't talk much about things which I don't know much about. But maybe if you could clarify, I can give a more specific reply. So Mariah says, I recently have been using some meditation techniques from various traditions because I find them all useful. Some teachers say not to mix methods or traditions. Is this really a problem? As long as it's all Buddhist, then no, it's not a problem. If you start incorporating things from other religions, then you can run into problems. But if it's just different meditation methods within different forms of Buddhism, that's fine. Generally speaking, all forms of Buddhism are based upon the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and different methods are usually just different ways of cultivating the same requisites of awakening. So it can be useful to consider the 7 factors of awakening, 5 spiritual powers, and ask yourself, is this method helping to cultivate one or another of these 7 factors of awakening or 5 spiritual powers? And if the answer is yes, then it's fine. So if it's building up mindfulness, it's building up joy, it's building up serenity, it's building up equanimity or whatever, then it's fine. So we're concerned with cultivating the qualities of mind which point towards awakening. The specific method is actually not that important. So there are some branches within Buddhism which say you should only use their method and nothing else. Okay, that's not my training. My training is to use all the tools you have at your disposal and to have lots of tools and to choose the ones which are relevant in any given moment. And that's been, for me, that's been incredibly useful. And I've also observed in many people how having a single method approach has hindered their progress. Trying to just do one single method all the time means that they're not well equipped to deal with the variety of different mental conditions that we can encounter. So a small number of people seem to do really well with a single method approach, but most people I've seen do much better with a multi-method approach. But your mileage may vary, so try it out, see what happens. See how it goes. Okay, and Jason says, what is the difference between bright Kamma and Kamma that is neither bright nor dark? It's reference to Anguttara Nikaya. What would be an example of the latter? So bright Kamma is good karma, so things which are wholesome, things which are beneficial to sentient beings, and which therefore produce beneficial results, effects that are positive, and which produce pleasant experiences. Karma, which is neither bright nor dark, is choices which have no moral content at all. For example, someone is like, oh, you can have either the blue shirt or the red shirt. And you're like, either one? I guess I'll take the blue one. It's like, well, that's neither bright karma nor dark karma. It's not good or evil. It's a neutral choice, a choice which has no moral content. So that would be karma, which is neither bright nor dark. And actually, a lot of our choices throughout the day are like this. A lot of the choices we make in life are not morally relevant. It still generates karma, and that it will still produce corresponding effects, but it is not necessarily good karma or bad karma. It's just neutral karma. I used to have a friend who said he had blue karma. And he said the reason for this is because he always seemed to wind up getting blue things. Like if somebody was giving out different colored notebooks, he somehow always got the blue notebook. Or if people were like taking pens from a drawer, he always somehow wound up getting a blue pen. So he liked to say he had blue karma. For some reason, he was always getting blue things in his life. So that's clearly not good or evil. It's just blue. So karma that's neither bright nor dark. And Amit says, how do we maintain heedfulness in the Dhamma and still make a living out in the world? By always keeping your precepts. 5 precepts are really important. Keep them all the time. And generally speaking, you can make a living while keeping the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts are really basic stuff. It's not complicated. And I would also say practice mindfulness of the body at all times. Again, not particularly complicated. So Manal asks, would you please review what is said about a person's spirit at the time of death, and if it stays near loved ones for any point of time after death? In Hindu beliefs, it is said the spirit stays in this realm for about 13 days or so, and sacred ceremonies are done in order to urge it to move forward to the next abode. So in the early Buddhist texts, it says nothing at all. There is absolutely zero information on this, nothing at all. So nothing is said about whether a person's spirit moves on immediately, or if they might hang out for a certain amount of time, or if an indeterminate amount of time. It just isn't talked about anywhere. So it's all speculation. So briefly speaking, we don't know, because it isn't clearly mentioned anywhere in the suttas. So some people will say that a person moves on immediately. So the moment they die, they're immediately reborn somewhere else. Other people will say, no, they can stick around as a ghost for any length of time. In the Tibetan tradition, they have it pinned down to a specific number of days, I think 49 days or something random and arbitrary like that. But that has no basis in early Buddhism. It's something that was added more than 1,000 years later, and it's probably based on Hinduism, in fact. So yeah, there's no consensus based on the early Buddhist texts. There's just different opinions. My own opinion is I tend to think that it is quite possible for a disembodied mind to stick around for some time after the body dies. But that's just my own opinion, and it's not necessarily the opinion of every Buddhist everywhere. So Amy says, what is said at the end after you pay homage to the Buddha? What is the translation? So I say, Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. which is in the Thai tradition, that's commonly said after the Namo Tassa, before giving a Dhamma talk. And briefly, it just says, I pay homage to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Literally, it's I bow to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So it's a little bit redundant, but it's kind of cute, and I like it, so I say it anyway. So Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. I pay homage to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. I bow to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So Smeeby says, I would like to know what is a good approach for beginning walking meditation. Focus on your feet. That's the basic method. Walk while focusing on your feet. Focus on your feet while walking. Don't do anything else. Don't look around. Don't swing your arms. Keep your body still except for your legs. Keep your eyes pointed down and focus on your feet. I usually recommend picking a straight line about 20 or 30 paces long and slowly walking back and forth while focusing on your feet. It's also fine to walk in a big circle, like if there's a park nearby which has a circular path, you can just walk circles, focusing on your feet. That can also be a nice option. And Rick says, are complex PTSD flashbacks part of the chitta, heart, mind, or a different part of consciousness? Things in the present trigger mental, physical, and emotional responses in the present based on trauma from the past. So first off, I don't know what you mean about a different part of consciousness besides chitta, because chitta just means mind. So every part of consciousness would be included in chitta. So there's nothing else apart from chitta. So of course, whatever mental experience you're having, whether it's a PTSD flashback or anything, it's all part of chitta because every mental experience is included in chitta. Yes, and as far as what's going on, it's all in the present moment. It's all present moment mental experience. That's all. Yeah, call it whatever you want. That's all it is. Present moment mental experience. And Sud says, in Janusani Sutta, it is said that Deva worlds, along with hell worlds, animal realm, and human realm are impossible places to share merit. I'm not sure that's what it says. If so, why do we share merit with the Devas? We share merit with the Devas because we're capable of sharing merit with Devas. So I'm not sure that's what the Janusani Sutta says. I think I would remember it if that was what it actually said. I'll have to look at the Janusani Sutta. Unless you can quote the passage you're referring to here. Otherwise, I'll need to have a look at it later and have a closer look, but I don't think so. And Sud says, I usually share merit with people who are sick or who are loved ones, etc. Is it impossible to share merit like this since they're in the human realm? My understanding is you can share merit with anyone in any realm. This idea of only being able to share merit with people in one specific part of samsara, as far as I can tell, does not have any basis in the suttas. It's something which seems to have emerged sometime much later in Buddhist tradition, but it's not something that seems to be supported by what we find in the suttas. And Rick says, I was wondering about the 5 aggregates. I assume this is related to your earlier question about chitta. So chitta includes the last 4 of the 5 khandhas. So the first khandha is the physical body. The next 4 are all mind. So that's chitta. It's all mind. So a PTSD experience would be predominantly sankhara, sankhara khandha, which is included in chitta. That's the last question. You have a question? Go ahead.
So we're reading this book by Ajahn Sangha, and it's about right effort. And he explains how, in order to attain liberation, one needs to fully understand and know right effort, and then it goes on to, and then like once fully understanding right effort, then you're able to move on to the next step, which is right mindfulness, and then moving on to right concentration. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, right effort is talking about the deliberate cultivation of wholesome mind states and the deliberate reduction of unwholesome mind states. That is Buddhism. That's what we're doing all the time. So there is a way of talking where one could say that right effort is in fact the basis of everything we ever do. So in that way of speaking, yes, you could say that it's a necessary requisite for everything else. But one could also say that, well, in order to do right view, you need to understand what right view is. So in order to do right effort, you need to have the right view to understand what it is and how it fits into the path and what awakening is and what the path to awakening is in the first place, and what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what supports the path, what doesn't support the path. So in that way of talking, you could say that actually right view is the basis, because without right view, you can't possibly do right effort. So these sorts of things, that usually depends upon what the particular teacher wants to emphasize. Another way of talking is that right intention is the basis, because you need to have right intention in order to do anything else in the path. So what is the basis? Is it right effort? Is it right view? Is it right intention? Well, it depends upon what you want to emphasize. So it sounds like that teacher chose to emphasize right effort, and that's understandable. Right effort's really important. But it's just one way of talking about things. Yeah. Okay, so here Sutta is quoting from the Janasoni Sutta. The breakup of the body after death, he appears in the animal womb, he lives there, remains there, this too is impossible. Place for that gift to accrue. Does Buddha mean gift or as a result of your good karma? It's difficult to be experienced in the animal world, so it doesn't show up fully. Let me see here. So, Sud, I'm just briefly looking at the Janasoni Sutta here. I think giving a detailed analysis of what the sutta is talking about would somewhat exceed the scope of monk chat here. So it'd probably be better to do that as a sutta study session. So if you could, Sud, if you could send in an email requesting that sutta, and I'll just do a sutta study on it one of these days. I think that would be easier than trying to explain it here during monk chat. So Amaranta says, a good friend died yesterday. How can I do something for her? Well, actually, since we're talking about dedication of merit, that's actually what's traditionally done. So you would do some good deed. Most commonly, in Buddhist countries, people would go and offer a meal to the Sangha somewhere. But otherwise, just any kind of good deed, especially an act of generosity of some sort, and dedicate the merit to your friend. So wishing, may the good karma that I do here, may it go to support my friend. Also, constantly bringing your friend to mind and wishing wherever they are, may they have good conditions, supportive conditions, good friends, good family, good teachers, access to the Dhamma, opportunity to practice the Dhamma. So having those good wishes for them. The main practice in Buddhist tradition is to do good deeds and dedicate the merit to the deceased one. Okay, and Rick says, when I ended my first serious romantic relationship, my girlfriend committed suicide. Oh, that's quite difficult, so I'm sorry that happened to you. Says, how does this affect her in my karma? Well, ultimately, if somebody chooses to do something, it's their own karma that they're making. So unless you did something deliberately in order to make her do that, then you're not personally responsible. So if you just broke up with someone because it was time to break up with them, well, that's normal. That's just part of life. And if somebody then of their own volition decides to commit suicide, that doesn't mean it's your fault. It doesn't mean it's your karma. It means that they made their own choice. They made their own karma. So remember that ultimately each person is personally responsible for their own decisions. Nobody else can make you do anything, and you cannot make other people do anything. Everyone makes their own choices. So rather ask yourself, what can I do in life that is good? What can I do in life that is morally beneficial to myself and to others? And then do that. And for your ex who committed suicide, dedicate merit to her. Wish well for her. Cultivate metta for her. But don't worry about like, oh, did I do something that contributed to her making that choice? Like, that's not a useful way of thinking. Ultimately, she made her own decision. So your focus is instead on trying to make the most wholesome choices you can in the present moment, in your own day-to-day life. That's the last question online. Anything else? Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up at this time so we can conclude the monk chat session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.